Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum, my dearest brothers and sisters, and welcome to this episode of Pillars of Islam with me, Dr. Mehwish Akram Qureshi. I start with the name of Allah. I praise Allah and thank Him for the greatest of all blessings, the blessing of Islam. I ask Allah to raise the rank of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his Muslim family and his companions, and to protect his nation from what he fears for it. In today's lesson, I'm going to be talking about the Quran and the different types of verses in the Quran. Now, Al-Quran is the revealed book, the book revealed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from which we are ordered to recite whilst we are praying. That is, reciting from it would be an act of worship, an act of obedience to Allah Ta'ala. The Quran has many surahs. Their number is 114, as you probably already know. And as you know, those surahs have a specific order in the Mus'haf. The Mus'haf starts with Surah Al-Fatiha and it ends with Surah An-Nas. However, take note here that the Quran was not revealed in the same order that the surahs are in the Quran. For example, the first revealed verses were the first 5 verses of Surah Al-Alaq, Surah 96, which is Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, khalaqal insana min alaq, Iqra wa rabbukal akram, alladhi allama bil qalam, allama al insana ma lam ya'lam. But they are not at the beginning of Al-Mus'haf. And the last revealed verse of the Quran is Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah 2, Ayah 281. وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ ثُمَّ تُوَفَّى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ مَا كَسَبَتْ وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ, which literally means, and fear the day that you will be resurrected. Then each person will get the results of that which they acquired, and none shall be dealt with unjustly. Now, this was the last verse revealed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it is not the last verse in Al-Mus'haf. Even in the same surah, sometimes verses were revealed, then verses were revealed from another surah or more than one surah. Then other verses were revealed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then after that, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was ordered to recite them from the first surah. So in brief, the order of revelation is not the same as the order of Al-Mus'haf that we have in our hands nowadays. So, in the Quran, there are 2 types of verses. One type is the muhkam, explicit verse, and the other type is the mutashabih verse, the implicit verse. Now, the verses which are called al-muhkam, the explicit verses, are the verses which, according to the language, cannot bear other than one meaning. Okay? So according to the language, the muhkam verse cannot bear other than one meaning. And such verses are called muhkam verses, explicit verses. They only bear one meaning. Like, for example, the ayah of Surah Ash-Shura, Surah 42, Ayah 11. Laysa kamithlihi shay', which means absolutely nothing resembles Allah by any means. Or like the ayah, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, which means, say, O Muhammad, Allah is one without a partner. Also, like the ayah, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ, which means nothing is similar to Allah Ta'ala. Another example of a muhkam verse is ayah 65 of Surah Maryam, هَلْ تَعْلَمُ لَهُ سَمِيًّا, which literally means, do you know of anything which is similar to Allah? In other words, there is none similar to Allah. Allah Ta'ala mentioned in Al-Quran that we have two kinds of verses in Surah Al-Imran, Surah 3, Ayah 7. Okay? In this verse, we are told that it is a necessity to take the muhkamat verses, the explicit verses, as a reference to interpret the mutashabihat verses as revealed in the Quran. Minhu ayatum muhkamat hunna ummul kitab. Allah described the muhkamat verses in the Quran as being ummul Quran, ummul kitab. What does it mean here? It means this is the asl. It means this is the base and the foundation. So, those explicit verses are the reference. This is why knowing about this issue is very important, because if the person cannot differentiate between what is explicit, muhkam, and what is implicit, mutashabih, then he might take the mutashabih verses as a reference and he would be misguided as a result. So it is very important to understand this issue. Now I'm going to explain Ayah 7 of Surah Al-Imran, Surah 3, in a bit more detail. Now this verse can be divided into three parts. The first part is هُوَ الَّذِي أَنزَلَ عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ منه آيات محكمات هن الكتاب وأخر متشابهات. So from the first part of this verse, it's understood that Allah revealed a book in which there are verses which are deemed muhkam and those which are deemed mutashabih. And the muhkam verses are the foundation of the book, based upon which the mutashabih verses need to be understood. Okay? هُوَ الَّذِي أَنزَلَ عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ مِنْهُ آيَاتٌ مُحْكَمَاتٌ هُنَّ الْكِتَابِ وَأُخَرُ مُتَشَابِهَاتٌ. Now, the people who liken Allah to the creation, those who claim to be Muslims, they end up going astray because they do not follow the basic reasoning that we mentioned previously. That is, they take the mutashabihat verses as a reference. And this is the opposite of what we have been ordered to do in the Quran. So what happens? They then misinterpret these mutashabih verses, and as a consequence, they end up contradicting the muhkam verses. Their misinterpretation causes them to contradict the muhkam verses. So, in other words, they ignored the meanings of the muhkam verses, which in its own right contradicts what Allah Ta'ala ordered us to do in Al-Quran. Because Allah Ta'ala revealed in Al-Quran, هُوَ الَّذِي أَنزَلَ عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ مِنْهُ آيَاتٌ مُحْكَمَاتٌ هُنَّ الْكِتَابِ وَأُخَرُ مُتَشَابِهَاتٌ. Which means Allah is the one who revealed the Quran to you. O Muhammad, amongst its verses, there are some muhkam verses and some mutashabih verses. And the muhkam verses are the aswal, the the foundation, and are the reference. So, Allah Ta'ala mentioned it clearly in the Quran that the muhkam verses are the reference. Now, the anthropomorphists, those who liken Allah to the creation, they didn't follow that, and thus they fell into tashbih, which is likening God to the creation, and this is blasphemy, this is kufr, and thus they are no longer Muslims. Moreover, Allah revealed in this same ayah about those who take the mutashabihat verses as their reference. فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ زَيْغٌ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْهُ ابْتِغَاءَ الْفِتْنَةِ وَابْتِغَاءَ تَأْوِيلِهِ. This means, as for those who are misguided, in other words, those who have a disease in their hearts, they are going to follow the mutashabih verses, misinterpreting them, seeking fitna and incorrect misinterpretations. This is what Allah Ta'ala mentioned in the Quran. And this is exactly what certain people who liken Allah to the creation do. When you see one of them teaching or speaking or the like, you would notice that he's coming with as much as he knows amongst the mutashabih verses. He focuses on telling the people about them, just as Allah mentioned in the Quran, so as to misguide the people, rather than focusing upon the muhkam verses and taking them as a reference. Now, the third part of this verse, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ يَقُولُونَ آمَنَّا بِهِ كُلٌّ مِّنْ عِنْدِ رَبِّنَا وَمَا يَذَّكَّرُ إِلَّا أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. This means no one knows their true meanings except Allah and those who are firmly rooted in the knowledge of the religion. The latter say, we believe in it. All of it is from our Lord, and none will understand the message except the men of comprehension. Now, I've given examples of muhkam verses, okay? And it's clear that their meanings are that the creation is not like the creator. Allah cannot be likened to the creation. Now, I'll give you an example of a mutashabih verse, okay? An example of a mutashabih verse is ayah 5 of Surah Taha, Surah 20. Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh istawa, which literally means Allah istawa over the arsh. Now, because istawa in the Arabic language can have 15 different meanings, clearly this verse is thus amongst the mutashabih verses because it has more than 15 meanings. Now, amongst its meanings, istawa can mean to subjugate, to be under the control of. Istiwa can mean to mature or to ripen. Istiwa can mean to equal or to be even or regular. Istawa can mean above by place. Istawa can mean above by status. Istawa can mean above in terms of place and status. Istawa can mean to be equivalent. Istawa can mean to be on the same level. Istawa can also mean to be or to become straight. Istawa can also mean to stand upright. It can also mean to straighten up. Istawa can also mean to settle upon or mount on. Istawa can mean to sit firmly on. It can also mean to be properly cooked or well done. And it can have other meanings. So, we know that the word istawa has more than one meaning from the Quran. So the word istawa is mentioned in the Quran itself with different meanings, such as in Surah Al-Qasas, Surah 28, Ayah 14. Now, in this, it's in reference to Musa alayhi salam. It states, وَلَمَّا بَلَغَ أَشَدَّهُ وَاسْتَوَى, which literally means, and when he reached full physical maturity. Okay, so you can see the meaning of istawa here is different. So, from what we've mentioned, for sure, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh istawa is not linguistically an explicit verse. It is not a muhkam verse. Which verse is it? It's a mutashabih verse. Now, if someone refers to it and takes it as a reference and does not differentiate, if he does not know that this is a mutashabih verse and he only knows one or two of its meanings for the word istawa, then he will end up misinterpreting this verse. For example, if he thinks that the meaning of istawa is to sit, and he does not know about the other meanings of this word, the other 14 meanings of this word, then he might think that this verse means that Allah sits on the arsh. If he thinks that this is the meaning of the verse, then he blasphemes, he commits kufr. So you can see why it is very important to understand this subject and why I'm explaining it to you guys. Because the person who understands this subject well, he would reason in a different way. This person who reads the verse, even if he does not know the different meanings of istawa, he's going to say that Allah revealed in the Quran, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, which means there is absolutely nothing like Allah. And this is an explicit verse. It's a muhkam verse. And we know that this is amongst the verses that are the aswal, the base, the reference in the Quran. So, because this verse means that absolutely nothing resembles Allah, then for sure, the meaning of the other verse, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh istawa, has to comply with the meaning of Laysa kamithlihi shay', because the verses of the Quran do not contradict one another. To reiterate, Laysa kamithlihi shay', which means there is absolutely nothing similar to Allah, is a reference. It is a muhkam verse. So we say, istawa has a meaning which complies with the verse Laysa kamithlihi shay'. Thus for sure, it does not mean sitting, because interpreting it by sitting necessarily contradicts the meaning of Laysa kamithlihi shay'. Interpreting it with the meaning of getting mature, that's another meaning of istawa, also contradicts the verse Laysa kamithlihi shay'. Interpreting it by meaning being established in a place, again, contradicts the verse Laysa kamithlihi shay'. Interpreting it by being above with distance, again, contradicts the verse, the muhkam verse, Laysa kamithlihi shay'. Interpreting istawa by meaning well cooked contradicts again, Laysa kamithlihi shay', which means there is absolutely nothing like Allah. So, even if the person doesn't know exactly what the meaning of istawa in the other verse is, still he says that it has a meaning that befits Allah and that complies with the verse Laysa kamithlihi shay'. Even if I don't know the other meanings, even if I don't know the exact meaning of this verse, such a person would be okay like that. He would be safe by that. Now, istawa, sitting, is not one of the meanings actually. And it's not one of the meanings here because sitting does not befit Allah, because being established in a place does not befit Allah. So this meaning is excluded. To get mature also does not befit Allah. So this is excluded also. To get equal to something also does not befit Allah. So this meaning is excluded. So what is left is the meaning of subjugating the arsh. In other words, having the control of the arsh. Allah having the control of the arsh. In other words, the arsh is under the control of Allah. And the meaning of having a high status, these two meanings, they befit Allah Ta'ala. So according to the language and according to the rules of the religion, it is permissible to interpret istawa as subjugating or having the highest status. Now, some people, they say, if you say that this verse means that the arsh is under the control of Allah, but then everything is under the control of Allah, why do we say this about the arsh? The answer is that in the Quran it says Allah is the Rabb of the universe, but it also says in the Quran that Allah is the Rabb of the arsh. So by saying that Allah is the Rabb of the arsh, it doesn't negate, it doesn't cancel out the fact that Allah is the Rabb of the universe. Also, subhanallah, as has been mentioned, Imam Abu Mansur al-Baghdadi, he said in his book, Al-Farqu Bayn al-Firaq, that Imam Ali radiyallahu anhu, the fourth caliph, he said, Inna Allah ta'ala khalaqa al-arsha idharan liqudratihi وَلَمْ يَتَّخِذْهُ مَكَانًا لِذَاتِهِ. This means Allah created the arsh as a sign of His absolute power and did not take it as a place for Himself. Because when the angels, they see this great body whose limit is known by none but Allah, they are certain of the absolute power of Allah. Their certainty of the absolute power of Allah increases. This is why Allah created the arsh and not to sit on it. Thus, the most knowledgeable person in our nation, Imam Ali, may Allah raise his rank, he said, Allah created the arsh as a sign of Allah's absolute power and not to take it as a place for Himself. Insha'Allah, I hope you can join me in the episode next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.